Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. All right, I'm going to take some calls this episode and respond before they start piling up on me. I've got quite a few from the last week or so. So these first calls are from Karl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents. I didn't know that they were doing a Green Knight RPG, but when I was watching the Green Knight, and probably much to the chagrin of my wife, I was like, oh man, this would make a great scenario for Pendragon. And I think they did something like that. Maybe it was called... It wasn't called the Green Knight, but I think it was called the Grey Knight. But it was very similar. And Gawain stepped up, or the player stepped up. I can't remember. Maybe it was a little different in that Gawain stepped up and was either captured or something like that, and the players had to go get him. But it was very similar in vein to the Green Knight. And I know Gawain was a central figure. So anyway, yeah, Pendragon. It could definitely be something you could use or run. But it'd be fun to check out that RPG. Thanks for the review and overview, BJ. Hey, Carl. Yeah, I think Pendragon is a game I've heard quite a bit about, but never got to play. I'd really love to try it sometime. But yeah, that everybody I've talked to about the movie has said when they've watched it, and of course most of my friends are gamers, so they were like, yeah, that would make such a cool role-playing game setting or inspiration for a role-playing game. Yeah, maybe if I get a chance to run that game online, maybe work it out where maybe you could join us. We'll see how it turns out. I hope to be able to put it together before too long when I have a free evening or a free weekend where I can get some people together. Anyway, thanks for the call, and we've got a couple more calls from Carl coming up.
Hey, BJ, thanks so much for the response to my Reservation Dogs question. I really liked it, and it's definitely inspiring me to really think about a possible game, again, using Tales from the Loop or Things from the Flood, depending if you want to do younger or older kids, and or play as younger or older kids. And it actually makes me think, it reminds me that Tales from the Loop, while I guess default is set in Sweden, they also have a Lake Mead alternative that you could play in, and there you could really explore other types of minority-based, marginalized communities in and around that area, instead of a European white, right, like you would in Sweden. So very interesting. And again, for me, it just reminded me of, what my rural family goes through as Latinx people in southwestern New Mexico. It's very similar. These types of communities, I feel, not totally, but there's definitely some commonality there, which I think is cool. So yeah, we gotta figure this out. Maybe we gotta sit together and chat about it. That'd be kind of cool. Hey, the territory of my job does encompass Oklahoma, so maybe I'll be visiting a university or a trade show near you. That would be even better, BJ. That'd be awesome. I really liked playing with you and getting to know you.
Well, thanks, Carl. Yeah, if you're headed up this way, let me know. And I'm kind of not probably in any of the major areas you would go for a trade show or to a major university, but I'm not too far away from Oklahoma City and Norman. So, yeah, if you're in the area, let me know. If I got time, maybe we can go grab lunch or something, chat. So, and of course, that was in response to our previous discussion about the show Reservation Dogs and how would you do a role-playing game based on that setting.
So that I think I talked about that last episode, and then also had called into Karl's show, one of his recent episodes. So check out those episodes. Check out Karl's podcast in general, The GMologist Presents. It's a great podcast. And check out Reservation Dogs on Hulu. Awesome television show. All right.
In fact, Arlen Walker plays Ardath, wielder of the Sword of the Moon Kings, or alternatively Ardath, he who wields the thrice cursed sword.
That was Karl again, reminded me of the name of Arlen's character in our Dungeon Crawl Classics game, which I did remember and put on at the very end of the last episode as an afterthought. But yeah, thanks for reminding me. He's got a really cool warrior character with this really interesting sword. So we'll see how their adventures unfold when we play again in next weekend.
Hey, BJ, this might be a series of messages because there was a lot of things on your last episode. But to answer your question that you asked to the group about the Palpatine throne room situation, yeah, I think it is a bad trope. Not all tropes are bad, but then again, not all tropes are good. It's one of the reasons I tend to exclusively run homebrew adventures, just because I think that whole premise is weird. And, when you get an inexperienced dungeon master, as I have in my Pathfinder group, she tends to just have the monsters stay in whatever room they're in and not move around at all. I think the longer you play, you realize, oh wait, these should be moving, but that's also a lot more work and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. That's the first part. Part 2, I don't think it's terrible to have the big bad on the wandering monster list. I don't have a wandering monster list. I tend to just have my monsters wherever I feel like they would be at the time, and they move around how they would, attracted to noise and that kind of thing. And so if they run into the party, they run into the party. If not, then not. But yeah, man, like the big bad should not just be sitting in their chamber, just especially if there's battles going on, spells being cast, swords being clashed. Like, yeah, I don't think the big bad would just sit back in their chamber and just be like, now I wait. But, that's how those modules were written. I mean, that's still how they're written, But okay, that's enough about the Palpatine throne problem. Yeah, I feel like I have to respond to call-ins on your show because they were talking, Karl and Jason were talking about me. Okay, so yeah, I think the DCC Magic system could work. I think it's funny that there are many of the same spells, Color Spray, Scorching Ray, Burning Hands, Detect Magic. I don't know how different the spell list would be, so I still think it would totally work. Yeah, and the swingy nature, if you have, it's not about Pathfinder players. Come on, Jason. It's about the type of people playing the game. If you got the right group playing Pathfinder, they would be into it for sure. And yeah, 6 a.m., 7 a.m. That's too early. That is too goddamn early on a Saturday to play some games. Granted, this past Saturday, I was 9 beers deep by noon, so what the hell am I talking about? Peace out.
Hey, that was Joe Richter of the Hindsightless podcast. Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think I'm with you on that. It's when you're starting out as a DM, just having the monsters in the room where they're set up. That's easy, and then as you get a little able to do a little more juggling, managing more than one process as you DM, you can probably start having them move around. But I think rather than even just having them move around, you might just select some of the monsters that you think could be in multiple locations and, just put in each of those locations the probability of the monster's there. And if it's already been encountered, then just scratch it off. But yeah, I like the idea of, and Palpatine's throne room may not have been a good example because, Luke was brought there on purpose for that confrontation. I think the more I thought about it, the more I thought the first Star Wars movie where Obi-Wan is sneaking around the Death Star looking for the shield or the tractor beam generators is maybe a little more like a dungeon crawl. He's got to dodge stormtroopers and hide and distract them and hide his presence. And then he does just encounter Vader. Now, granted, Vader realizes he's there and goes to find him, but he does just kind of stumble into Darth Vader in the hallway as he's trying to get back to the ship. So maybe that's a little better. If you're going to use Star Wars as an analogy, maybe that one's a little bit better. God, I love Star Wars. Even the things parts about it that everybody hates. I know. My canon is just much bigger than Jason's. It encompasses everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, yeah. Thanks for the calls, Joe. And on the Pathfinder Magic, yeah, I think you're right. You could just swap it out. I think you might make a few little tweaks just to smooth out the rough edges, but I think it would be pretty easy to put it into Pathfinder. I don't know about Pathfinder 2. I'll find out. I'm going to get a chance to play Pathfinder 2 next week to see what it's like. But definitely Pathfinder 1 or 3rd edition D&D, 5th edition D&D. Couldn't do it in 4th edition D&D. It's just a completely different beast. But Pathfinder 1, D&D 3, D&D 5, yeah, I think you could just swap them out with a little bit of tweaks here or there.
Hey, BJ, awesome episode. Good review of the Green Knight game. Couple questions. One, you said the scenarios, sorry, I'm riding the exercise bike, are heavily based on or not heavily, but based on the movie. Would someone who has seen the movie, would that maybe spoil the game for them? And two, I don't know, is that a role-playing game? I mean, to me, it sounds like it's a role-playing game in the same sense that those dungeon delving board games are a role-playing game. That is to say, if you want to make it one, you can, but at its heart, it sounds more like a board game where you just kind of progress from zone to zone. That doesn't sound bad at all. It sounds like a super fun game anyway. But yeah, I don't know. Role-playing game? Probably. Peace out. Yo, BJ, me again. I think it every time I listen to the end of your episodes, but I love the name of your theme music, dude. Every time you say the name of the song is Come and Get It, it brings a smile to my face. I don't know why. I just feel like the title fits the song so perfectly, dude. I don't know if that's a buddy of yours or if you bought that off somewhere, but it rocks, dude. Anyway, man, take it easy. Have a good weekend. Peace out.
Yeah, Joe, I would call it a role-playing game. It's a pretty simple role-playing game, and probably the game itself is a role-playing game is you just don't have very much of a pre-made scenario to have a big game. And the three scenarios are, I don't think you have to do them in a specified order. They do all three come up, I guess. Yeah, even though they reference the movie, I think watching the movie wouldn't ruin playing through the role-playing game because the scenarios are just a little bit different enough. I think that there's some stuff in there that isn't in the movie that you would still be kind of surprised. Oh, that's not how it went in the movie. This is a little more. This is a little different. So I would, but I would call it a role-playing game. I think that the game is a role-playing game. It's just a real simple role-playing game. The lack of scenarios don't make for much of an adventure like we would normally want to see. But yeah, I think there's a little more to it probably than those board games because you can go off script and you improv some scenarios and things like that based on the interplay between the players and the game master. But it's definitely not a weighty adventure or a module compared to what we're typically used to. As for the theme song, I just got that off of Wikimedia Commons. It was free use as long as you credit the musician in your use of it. So I just kind of like I like the sound, the theme. That I like that guitar riff and that beat. So yeah, but that's just like I said, I got it off of Wikimedia Commons. It's free use as long as you credit the creator. So thanks for the call. You have a good weekend too. Everybody, that was Joe Richter of Hindsight. Let's make sure you check out his podcast.
Hey, BJ, Daniel from Meds. Keep calling in. Sorry, I'm super far behind. I said that funny. Anyways, I'm super far behind, but I was, you were talking about that WotC can't get away from Vancy and Magic. And yeah, they can't get away from the system they're using. And yeah, I did look at the spell point system at one point, and yeah, it's a little weird, but I guess they needed to do that to make it work with the character classes as written. But I would put it out there that I don't actually think that WotC's system or the fifth edition system of casting is in fact Vancian magic. I would even go back so far as to say that I don't know when it was first said, possibly in one of the supplements, but certainly in first edition and certainly in BX, that you can, as soon as you can memorize a spell more than once, you're gone from Vancian in my mind. I can't imagine anybody in the Vancian world memorizing a spell more than once. And also, you don't, in the modern edition, anyways, you don't have to keep rememorizing them, right? So they're not. It's not really. It's more like a mana thing, like spell slots for mana disguised as.
That was Daniel Norton of the Bandits Keep podcast and YouTube channel. Thanks, Daniel. I think you make a good point. It's not technically Vancian magic anymore. It's evolved into its own thing. I think it's probably more accurate to say the one thing Wizards of the Coast can't seem to get away from is spell slots, which we sort of evolve out of the use of Vancian magic in original D&D, or at least Vancian inspired magic, but they can't seem to get away from the idea of spell slots. And as I mentioned, anytime they've tried to come up with alternatives, it still always goes back to somehow or another you're using spell slots. I think spell slots are very good. I've come to appreciate them as an easy to understand, easy way to organize spell casting, even though you sacrifice a degree of flexibility a little bit, as opposed to when you're using actual spell points or something like DCC where you can just do it, but there's always a chance of failure. But yeah, technically not Vancian, but the spell slots, which I think are kind of a derivative of Vancian, they continue to use those, even though they change exactly what they mean and what they represent, as each edition moves on from the previous. But Daniel's got some more to say about another topic.
EJ, Daniel from Bandits Keep. I'm actually not caught up, but I decided to listen to the most recent episode. That way my voice bills wouldn't seem so out of sync. So anyways, Palpatine's throne. I guess I will, this might be multiple messages, but I'm going to take it from a couple of different angles. Number one, old school modules. Well, first of all, I'll start with the most basic angle. It's not that they're sitting in the room all the time. It's that in a modern gamer's terminology, this would be called a set piece encounter. That is basically you've set up this encounter with them in their lair because that's the exciting encounter. So you could take it in that direction. They're not there all the time. They just happen to be there when you show up. Now, yeah, it might not make sense. But, who knows when an ogre is going to be sitting in their lair, or evil high priest is going to be doing a sacrifice. And if it makes for a cool set piece encounter, why not? The second angle, which is the angle that is basically how I've usually understood how the modules should be run and how we just ran them. Maybe that's why I understand that. It probably doesn't explicitly say this, but it's like giving you a layout. You can obviously change, and clearly if you are invading, especially noisily, a lair of a creature, it is going to come forward and fight you. So it will move out of that room. It doesn't have to be fought there. But also I'll go from the angle of what's the most likely place that you're going to run into this creature. I mean, if you were to come into my house on any weekday, right? I have an office in my house. I would probably be sitting in the office. So, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that I would be there. So, assuming that these things have layers and they sleep and eat and live and whatever in that space, that doesn't seem unlikely they'd be there. But if it's just a bedroom or especially a throne room, yeah, then they either wouldn't be there and you would do whatever's logical. In fact, what you want to do is if the players have a good idea, like, okay, well, we know that we've heard that the Goblin King holds court in the throne room during these hours, through whatever means they've to define that out, right? Well, they could either go to the goblins, let's say, sleeping quarters, sneak there and hide, and then have the confrontation there, or they know that they're in the throne room. They might be able to attack that room very heavily and maybe destroy them there when they're not aware or wouldn't think that anybody would dare to do it, right? So some of this information can be spread out to the characters ahead of time to make it kind of more interesting in that way. I will finally say, though, I'm sure I had another thought, but if it comes to me, I'll call it, that Todd over at Hex Press's YouTube channel, you'll have to roll back a bit, but he actually does a video about this. where he basically takes each of the rooms in the dungeon and then rolls encounters based on like the number of rooms versus what actually is written in that room. Okay, one more. Speaking of Todd, we were just having this discussion we were talking about telegraphing, but in that discussion we talked about the idea that it's implied in the rules, if not outright stated, that you should be that these are like giving you concepts and ideas that you should work with, right? There wouldn't be, if you rolled a random encounter with a dragon, it wouldn't be in a 10-foot square room. If you rolled an encounter with 50 orcs, it wouldn't suddenly be in the hallway in front of you if you rolled surprise. You've got to like use a little bit of logic, right? So yeah, if it doesn't make sense for that monster to be there, why would it be there? But then at the same time, why wouldn't it be in a certain setup, right? I mean, if it's the throne room of the king, isn't that where they do business? Wouldn't they be there pretty much all the time? If not, I mean, then move them, I guess. But I would only move them if it was a player decision to go there during a different time period, so that they were basically getting a bonus for their action. Okay, now I remember my other thought. One thing that we have to remember as dungeon masters is that the players do not know what we know. That is, it might seem silly to you that the room is just sitting there saying, hey, Palpatine's there. But the players don't know that Palpatine is supposed to be there or whatever, right? So even if you run it straight and you leave everything where it's supposed to be, if you play it up really coolly, you just give it a reason to be that way. It won't seem weird. It's only when people overanalyze things, or analyze them, period, I suppose, that they start finding all these holes. I mean, the players don't know, which is one reason why we have to, as DMs, we are kind of playing a slightly different game than they are. We know information they don't know, so we can telegraph forward that this is the throne room and that it's very likely that this is where Palpatine's going to be. Not, oh, well, they can see and they know that he's in this room 24/7, so they can do what they want. That's the difference that we have to make in our head.
I think, Daniel, you're making some really good points there. Thinking about the big boss's chambers, just his office. Yeah, that's a good analogy. I think what you're saying, and I don't mean this in facetious at all, because I don't think it's actually difficult to do, although it may sound like an onerous task, but I don't think it is, would be to maybe sketch out a schedule or a day schedule for what the main villain does with their time, and how much time do they spend in a certain place looking at reports, issuing orders to their minions. How much time might they spend in some kind of private study or meditation, if they're a wizard or a cleric or something like that, and then how much time might they spend just back, effectively their private quarters, their bedroom, with either alone or they have family or live there with them, or whatever it is they might do in their downtime. But when and where are they in those locations, and what are they up to? That wouldn't be too hard to sketch out. You don't have to do it for everything in the dungeon, but for the bosses that might be encountered in multiple places or engaged in different activities depending on when you go. I've come to appreciate much more in the last few years the need to track time. I know Gary Gygax is really big on this, and it is a very useful tool to keep track of time. A lot of DMs hand-waved it, and for a long time I did too, and you don't get much. I think there's almost an assumption, like in 5th edition, that the DM is tracking time, but it's really never really spelled out explicitly anywhere, the procedure for keeping track of time the way you get it in older school games. But yeah, if you're keeping track of time already, and you kind of figure out what were the day's schedule for the bad guys, and when and where they might be encountered or missed at different times. So I don't know if that was the point you were making, Daniel, but you certainly inspired me to think about a way of tackling an issue. And of course, you're completely right. The players, 99.9% of the time, they don't even care. They don't notice. It's a trope that you encounter the boss in the heart of its lair, and they don't question that. But it always helps to vary things up so you can surprise them. Oh crap, he's not in his study. Well, where is he? He's got to be wandering around out there somewhere. Well, what are we going to do? Are we going to just ignore it? Are we going to say, well, we'll come back later, or do we got to go hunt him down? It changes the problem, I guess, a little bit. So, thank you, Daniel. And here we got a couple more short calls from Daniel. before we end the episode?
Completely random, but you're doing your session recap at DCC, and it made me think of how, like, well, oftentimes when we're describing things in these fantasy RPGs, we'll use like modern like terms that because it's a way that the players can understand what their characters are seeing. 'Cause you're explaining something, right? So you're like, oh, it kind of looks like laser beams going across, whatever. And when you play in a game, like I'm in a Mutant Crawl Classics game with Andy Goodman, and it's such a struggle when you're in games like that to describe things that are actually like, let's if you wanted to actually describe the laser thing to somebody who didn't um, understand it, right? So you're always like, there's a metal thing, it's a window. I mean, Andy does a great job doing it, but I always find that I struggle with that kind of stuff. So kind of a funny thing. I just thought it was interesting because I do the same thing that it seems like Carl did there. Sometimes it's easier just to compare it to something modern, right? Sounds really cool. I'm going to get back to it. But while that Salt Marsh game sounds pretty cool, I've actually run, again, the AD&D version, part of it anyways, in AD&D. It was interesting. I started it in 5th edition. We ran the first module, and then I just sat down with the guys. None of them had played anything but 5th edition, and I was like, it'd be way less work for me if we could just run this in 1st edition. And they were like, okay. So we got a whole bunch of people playing 1st edition for the first time. It's really cool. But anyways, yeah, it sounds like a really cool game. A nice group you got in with, and oh yeah, Girdle of Giant Strength. That is a great magic item. Looking forward to hearing more play reports on that one.
Yeah, I remember being in I think this was the first 3rd edition game I played. This is the first D&D game I played after I'd taken a few years hiatus while I was in grad school. And, the buzz around the village was that someone had discovered a metal ring with teeth. And it was basically a cog. It was a gear from a clockwork device. But the DM was very much trying to describe it in terms people in a medieval world would describe it, and avoiding any requests we made of him to draw it or sketch it out, because he knew if he drew it, we would go, oh, it's a gear. Or not a gear, a cog. Yeah, it is a challenge to not use. I think the most egregious one we do is when people when people use a projectile weapon from a bow, sling, crossbow, we say they fire. They don't fire. Fire comes from the advent of firearms. It would be they loose. You loose an arrow, you loose a bolt. But we just say fire because we're so used in the modern era of saying firing when we're talking about shooting a gun. I guess shoot. I guess you could still use the word shoot with bows and crossbows. Yeah, sometimes it's just easier to use naturalistic language, but everybody just has to not allow that to ruin their immersion. But it is fun to try to figure out what is he talking about when he's describing this word. A good DM who can do that well that's a great skill. As far as the Pathfinder game goes, not the Pathfinder. Boy, it's Friday night and I'm tired. As far as the 5e game with Salt Marsh, I'm looking forward to having a paladin with the 23 strength. I've come to appreciate when I play a martially oriented character that their job is just to wreck things. Whether it's a fighter or a barbarian or paladin, your motivation for doing so may change, but those are the kind of characters that, well, it's time to fight. So I'm going to go, I'm all in. I'm looking forward to playing that character a little more and enjoying that campaign. Thanks again for your calls, Daniel.
Hey, BJ, Jason here. Interesting review of that game, The Green Knight. So I'm curious if you had picked up any of the other movie tie-in games, like The Princess Bride or Labyrinth. Labyrinth seemed a little more approachable for new people, maybe, than The Green Knight sounds to be. But yeah, interesting. I think I won't buy it based on your review, just because of the lack of replayability and the ease of just importing those ideas into other systems. But the Dishonor track and having the idea of that in a game is interesting. I don't know. I mean, obviously the heavy-handed way to do that's with a deity, with a cleric or paladin. but how do we incorporate that with all character classes? I think the answer, I don't know, might be to incorporate a reputation/infamy track in the game, and that reputation/infamy track will affect the reactions of those you encounter, and because if you're doing a world like the Green Knight, it depends on the game you're playing in. But if you're doing a medieval world, the reactions of the lords and ladies, the landowners, and things like that are going to be huge as far as you seeking shelter and getting supplies and getting. If you've got a bad reaction and the land nobles and the people in charge don't react well to you, then all you are going to be is a bandit having to live off the land and rob people, right? So I think you maybe do the reputation infamy thing. I don't think I would replace alignment with it. I think I would have it as a separate thing. But I think that could work quite well. Because you could be, and it depends how much you want to play up alignment anyway, but you could be a bad person. You could be of a negative alignment, or a selfish alignment, I guess, and still have a good reputation. You could be that Eddie Haskell character, right? So, but yeah, I think that's the way I would go, because a reputation or infamy thing could equally apply to any class. It's not like you're locked in with honor and dishonor like you might. I mean, obviously in a game like Pendragon, this is pretty easy to do, but if we're incorporating to regular D&D, I think we need to add an attribute to do this, or add a tracker to do this. But yeah, I'll be interested to see what other people say.
Hey, Jason, I think you're right. I think you wouldn't want to replace alignment with it. Although I think it might spoil some fun depending on the game, for people who want to play selfish, unscrupulous, if not evil alignments, because I don't know if it would spoil the fun or not. It was certainly, you would have to be more careful about how you played those alignments that are not very heroic or socially acceptable, because being true to your alignment and getting caught could mean some loss of honor or reputation. That might make an interesting way to certainly would cut down on the murder hobo and the chaotic, stupid kind of behavior for people who want to play those kind of alignments. Although I think most people who play those alignments don't play them that way. They do it a little more light touch. But you always got some people who are always trying to, wreck things by playing a contrarian character or a disruptive character and pinning on their character's alignment. So that might be a way of balancing that out. So sure, you can do that, but there's going to be a cost, and it can't be just the cost of everybody wagging their finger at you and going, well, here's how we measure the impact that has on how most NPCs are going to react to you. But then, of course, you got to have the idea of, well, when I go to a town I've never been to, how do they know my reputation? I can just give them a different name. How are they going to know? So I think you'd have to think about that as a DM. Of course, if you really want to play it more like an actual, like medieval towns. Oh, look, Jason's calling, so my dogs have decided to bark like his dogs do. I think if you want to be more true to if you really want to get into the spirit of kind of somewhat pseudo-medieval stuff, I think in medieval towns, people are generally mistrustful of strangers anyway. So if they don't know you, you already kind of have a little bit of everybody's kind of keeping an eye on you and wary of just kind of why are you here and who you're here to visit and what state's your business and how long are you going to be here. But again, I think as many people pointed out, we don't play. We use a medieval veneer for a game that really functions much more like an Old West adventure, where a lot of the trappings of D&D have more in common with a Western than they do a medieval adventure. Anyway, thanks for the call, Jason. And yeah, I think you can add. There are a number of ways you could add that. You could use it as a tracker, just like they do in the Green Knight game, or there are multiple house rules and optional rules. I think particularly in 5e, the DMG has a rule for adding reputation as a seventh statistic, but I think they use it more like other games use luck, where it fluctuates up and down over time as opposed to just being static the way your other abilities are. Anyway, but yeah, that's a good point. You'd have to think about how to put that in another game. But it might be interesting. So yeah, thanks again for the call. I want to thank my callers, Karl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents podcast, Joe Richter of Hindsightless, Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and Daniel Norton of Bandits Keep. Be sure to check out their podcasts, who are all available here on Anchor. I think, man, those were all the usual suspects. Those are the 4 callers I get the most frequently, and I managed to get them all in one episode. How about that? All right, I will hope everybody's doing well up there. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll be back later with another podcast. And that's it for this episode of The Arcane Alienist. I want to thank Dave Bone for the cover art that I use for the episodes. Check out ironseer.com. And the music is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. Thank you for listening. Give me a call sometime through the Anchor app or at the Anchor website, and I'll be back in the future with another episode.